Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Interchange. No, there's nothing wrong with your television. I'm Kevin Fischer, sitting in for Dan Jones, who has the night off. We have a very compelling list of topics, so let's get right to them, shall we? But first, let's meet our panel. Joining us tonight are longtime newspaper columnist Joel McNally, Gerard Randall, consultant and local job creation expert, and Denise Callaway, communications director for the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. Rick Horowitz will be along with commentary at the end of the show, but please continue to watch anyway. First thing we'll talk about is this. A Milwaukee alderman says voter fraud is alive and well. Jim Witkowiak represents a near South Side district on Milwaukee's Common Council. He was my guest last week on WISN Radio and discussed his appearance before the Wisconsin Government Accountability Board. He said he was personally victimized by voter shenanigans during his bid for re-election back in 2000. Witkowiak lost that race by only 17 votes. During the subsequent recount, Witkowiak's campaign staffers admitted to Witkowiak there were problems. Witkowiak found 200 people who didn't exist voted in the election. An assistant DA told Witkowiak, "There's more meat in this sandwich than I've ever seen before in my life." Witkowiak ran again in 2004 and won, but then in 2008 he found 400 people had registered at the polls in the spring primary. He checked it out, wanting to make sure he wouldn't see more trouble in the general election. Witkowiak did a mailing to those 400 people, and 80 came back to him labeled undeliverable. The evidence was turned over to the police and the DA's office. They did nothing. So, Denise, we have Alderman Jim Witkowiak. He has lots of evidence, phony names, phony addresses. He told me the buses came in on election day. He's not exactly a right-wing conservative. Are you convinced? Is this a serious problem? He says voter fraud is alive and well.
I think when voter fraud happens, it's always a serious problem. I think that the thing that would really have been most helpful is when the alderman found these things were taking place or thought they were taking place back in 2000 and 2004, to have brought that information right then and there, not only to the attention of the Election Commission, but then also the media. You know, the problem is it's a little difficult now to go back when so much time has elapsed and see, you know, what we do about it. But clearly, if there are cases where there's voter fraud, it's serious. I think the question we've all kind of debated here is how serious it is and how widespread it is.
What do you think, Joel? You've kind of, you know, lampooned this suggestion in the past. And you don't take it that seriously. What about this instance now?
I didn't listen to your show, and where I heard about this was in Patrick McElhearn's column in the Journal Sentinel. He was on a right-wing radio show, and he appeared in a right-wing column in the Journal Sentinel about something that allegedly happened in the year 2000.
He's got plenty of evidence. He showed it to the government. He showed it to the GAB in Madison.
If he had plenty of evidence, as Denise said, he should have gone to the district attorney. It would have been investigated. The district attorney and the U.S. attorney, who happened to be a Republican during that period, said they investigated many allegations of vote fraud. They could find no coordinated vote fraud. A decade later to claim, boy, this was really a terrible problem back in the year 2000 because I lost by 17 votes. The truth of the matter is, and the Republicans have shown this over and over, you know, they stand in front of people's houses and say, there was someone who allegedly voted from this house and now they're not here and that proves, you know, vote fraud. No, it doesn't. It proves that there are a whole lot of people in this community that change addresses all the time, particularly in poor communities, particularly, you know, in the Latino community on the south side and the black community on the north side. The mobility of people, you know, there's all kinds of reasons why you get cards returned.
So this is very interesting. It's the alderman's fault.
No, there's something fishy about coming a decade later and saying, I have evidence of vote fraud back in 2000. So
you find more problems with him than the problem he's trying to address.
No, I find problems with a right-wing radio show and a right-wing column claiming now that there was vote fraud back in 2000 when no one can prove anything.
Well, Jim Witkowiak got in his own car and traveled up to Madison to share his experiences, his firsthand experiences with the Government Accountability Board. I don't think this was some right-wing conspiracy. I think it's far more serious. If it's happening in an aldermanic district, you extrapolate that statewide, countrywide, to suggest that there aren't shenanigans and dirty tricks going on. I think is naive.
The stakes get ever higher with these elections, particularly since 2000. If I'm not mistaken, in the year 2000, that was a spring election. The Republicans had not yet gained control of the White House, so the U.S. attorney would not have been a Republican. He would have been a Democratic.
Doesn't matter, because whether Republican or Democrat, they say it doesn't exist.
Well, no, Republicans have never said that voter fraud does not exist.
Steve Biskupic said that.
No, he got up at a news conference with E. Michael McCann and said there were problems, and they laid them all out. In fact, it was right there in the Journal-Sentinel.
He did not say there was organized voter fraud.
And I respect both Biskupic and, frankly, I respect E. Michael McCann. My problem is that these voter fraud allegations and the evidence of voter fraud, no matter how minor, will continue as long as we don't have safeguards like voter ID in order to help mitigate or prevent.
Voter ID hits those people who don't have IDs.
No, it doesn't.
Who happen to be African American, who happen to be poor, who happen to be Latino.
Every response.
Who happen to be elderly.
Every response to those concerns that have been raised about putting the burden on the poor, putting the burden on the elderly, that it will stop them from voting, has been addressed by making modifications to the process so that it's fair for everyone concerned.
And it's a phony argument to say that it will disenfranchise the minorities, the poor, the elderly. James Causey in the Journal-Sentinel a few weeks ago, he went undercover as a homeless person for 72 hours, and in order for him to get a bed at a downtown shelter, he had to show a state ID. That's amazing. If these people that are going to find shelter at night to get a bed can get a state-issued ID, I think we can ask voters to get a photo ID.
Your constitutional right is different than whether you can rent a video or get a bed at a shelter.
And if they can make accommodations for your being able to take care of basic human needs, they can also make accommodations to ensure your constitutional rights.
But as part of ensuring your constitutional rights, I think it's important for us to say, are we going to, in essence, take the risk of disenfranchising honest people to try to catch something that is such a ghost that it's hard to pin it down?
And voter fraud exists. We're out of time, Denise.
I don't cheat. I don't cheat. But I don't think that means.
I have to maintain order as host.
That means that
Denise,
just because someone is.
We're out of time. And voter fraud exists because.
We're out of time, but you're still.
I'm the host. Alderman Witkowiak's own opponent, his campaign people admitted that they were cheating. So
There's no organized voter fraud.
It sounds too weird, too stupid, and utterly ridiculous to be true, but it is. The Milwaukee Public School Teachers Union, their own worst public relations enemy, is demanding that the school board include or ask for, and I can't believe I'm saying this on public television of all places, erectile dysfunctional drugs and pills as part of their health insurance coverage. The union has gone to court claiming the lack of Viagra, Cialis, and Levitra coverage discriminates against male employees. The cost would be $786,000 a year, the equivalent of hiring 12 first-year teachers. Now, don't forget, dozens and dozens of MPS teachers recently were given pink slips. Now, normally when I'm a panelist, I get in the playpen and roll around with you guys, but I have to maintain some decorum. Let's keep the guffaws and giggles and chuckles to a minimum. This is, I mean, what were they thinking? What were they thinking?
I think it's extraordinarily serious when you take a look at that's one drug, and that one drug having a near $1 million impact on the benefits package and the cost to provide that benefit, particularly when it's mostly perceived as a recreational drug and not one with a serious medical need. Certainly,
you're not going to die if you don't have Viagra.
Well, you won't. And your doctor can advocate for you to get the drug and have it count as a medical necessity if they go to bat for you. You can then get the discounted costs for that drug. I was in the barbershop and reading a magazine. It's a hip-hop magazine, and they were promoting the use of Viagra specifically for recreational use among young people. And
great, just what they need, right?
So when that kind of notion is out there, it makes it very difficult for others to argue that there's a medical need for this and that it should count as a discounted pharmaceutical for insurance purposes. And I think the teachers, their union certainly, may have misplaced priorities by advocating for it.
What about this goofy argument that it discriminates against men?
It obviously does. I mean, this is a drug for men, right? It is not a drug for women. If, in fact, the teacher's contract said that men could get pregnancy leave but women couldn't, don't you think that would be discriminatory? If women can get drugs for sexual dysfunction but men can't, I believe that's sexual discriminatory.
There really are no drugs for women who have sexual dysfunction like Viagra.
There are problems that women have
but there's
that
nothing
are
like Viagra
medical
for
problems that are dealt with insurance, and they should be. The idea that
no, they shouldn't be. They just give them a George Clooney video.
The idea that sex is merely recreational. This is a bizarre argument I'm hearing from you conservatives. It's merely recreational.
It's a waste of money. That's a pretty good argument.
It's merely recreational, and that it's not important in life. I believe sex is probably one of the most important things in all of our lives. And in
trying to get me to agree with you?
And in our intimate relationships with our loved ones.
But that has nothing to do with the bargaining.
That's not a serious problem. That's why Viagra was invented. That's why it's advertised all over television.
It was an accidental discovery.
But I mean, that is why it has taken, the idea that a $20 pill could do what, a man used to have to buy an expensive SUV to get, is an amazing.
I have a 16-month baby girl, so I still got it.
I'm saying this is a serious. I think the question of discrimination is serious, and this was part of a lawsuit. This isn't the way the news story presented it. They're going after this instead of hiring more teachers. No, they're not. It's part of a lawsuit over a discriminatory decision by an arbitrator that they say treats men differently than women, and it certainly does.
Especially when a lot of teachers are sitting at home unemployed.
I
now,
agree with that,
Denise, is it the taxpayer's obligation to help out horny guys?
Well, I don't know that you can say everybody who needs Viagra is a horny guy.
Well, it doesn't speak well to the virility of MPS teachers if they're demanding Viagra.
Well, let me just say this. I think their timing on this is horrible. And of all the things that the teachers union says are important to its members, I think the very first thing we can all agree on is a job is the most important piece. So to have
this was a lawsuit over an arbitrator's decision that was in process.
Right,
it's hitting the news right now, and all the talk shows are going to be talking about it, and they're going to say, look, they're going after Viagra instead of going after jobs for teachers. That's not the case.
But let me finish this. So the reality of it is we're talking about the same pot of money that all of this is going to have to come out of, one way, shape, or form or another. So the unfortunate thing is that this is a discussion that's happening at the same time that you still have over 500 teachers who don't have their job.
And you also have taxpayers who, if they haven't lost their jobs, have lost benefits or are paying through the nose for them. And they see teachers who have come across through their own fault because they come across as whiners and crybabies, et cetera. They're getting these Cadillac benefits. It's not going to sit pretty with them.
Well, I think that the whole issue really is the issue of timing. And there's no way to get around about that. They didn't have total control over timing of it, but the one thing that they did have some total control over was whether or not this is an issue that they wanted to go to the mat with at this time when the district is having such severe financial problems that it's got to lay off 600 people. Over 400 of them teachers.
When is an appropriate time to fight discrimination?
One of the responses was that it's a $1.2 billion budget, and this is a drop in that bucket.
I don't know about you, but I don't count almost $800,000 as a drop in anybody's bucket I know.
And it is not, and that response, if it's accurate, was certainly a real feeble response to all those concerns about the cost of providing benefits and the priorities of the union that went after pursuing this versus some of the other more important parts of that budget.
And I think that's one of the things we have to talk about. What really are the priorities? And I understand.
They're mixed up, apparently.
I understand that for some people this is obviously a very serious issue, and I understand that for some people they may view it as some form of discrimination. But the bottom line is, teachers need to be in the classrooms. And if we're spending money in other areas that takes away from that, it is absolutely right not only for us to talk about it, it's right for teachers to talk about it. And I'll guarantee you, I know teachers who've been laid off who are asking the same questions that we are right now.
We move on to our next topic. We want to keep our most precious commodity, our children, safe from sex predators. So we lock them up and ideally keep them locked up until there are reasonable assurances that the creeps will not reoffend. But incarcerating and treating convicted sex offenders isn't cheap. In some states, the price tag is as high as $175,000 a year for each offender. Here in Wisconsin, the annual expense for each confined offender is over $142,000. By comparison, we spend just over $31,000 for each inmate in our adult prison system. Now, Joel, I know you like to spend taxpayer dollars, and amongst the panelists that have ever sat on this program, you, more than any of the others, have given more latitude to sex offenders.
Is
this too much money to spend?
Probably made a reputation on this show because of the fact I'm one of the few people who will say that this, demonizing of sex offenders that we envision snatching kids off the street is phony. It is politicians standing up and Republican politicians like the ones you work for standing up and saying, we'll spend whatever it takes to take these people off the street for the rest of their lives. That we've now come to this thing in our law where after someone serves their sentence, they can't get out of prison. It used to be you served your sentence, right? You paid the price, but no,
the Supreme Court said that's constitutional.
Yeah, I know they did, and that was one of the most horrible decisions. As a result of that, we have geriatric sex offenders with walkers that we are spending $142,000 a year.
If you're looking for sympathy from me, you're not going to get it.
No, I'm not. No, I never would. But I'm telling you that the problem.
So what do we do instead?
The problem of sex abuse, and my wife works with women who have been sexually abused from a very young age. Almost universally, the problem was not some creep, as you call them, off the street abusing them. It was someone in their family. And we don't deal with that problem. Instead, we beat our breasts and say, we've kept these people in prison forever and ever and ever and spending millions of dollars.
I get the message. It's too much money.
What else are you going to do? The only other option would be to murder them, which some people argue to do, or castrate them. Which some people say to do.
I just say keep them locked up for a long time.
I would say lock up people who want to murder people or mutilate them.
I understand. You made your point. Too much money, Denise? $142,000 a year?
Well, I think the question is not, is $142,000 too much money, but what's happening for that $142,000? For those people who need treatment, because some of these people might be able to be treated. Some of the people who are habitually or labeled as sex offenders are 18, 19-year-old men who had sex with an underage girl. That's a very different kind of situation when you're talking about a sex offender than someone who did prey on young women or young boys and pull them off the street.
So I think they deserve treatment, should get it, but the jury is out on whether it's effective or not and whether it works.
I think what the tendency is to kind of lump all sex offenders into this one pot and say, oh my gosh, they're all the man in the trench coat lurking around the corner ready to flash in and grab you. And the fact of it is that's not the case in all of these situations. A significant number of these cases are people who fall into the first category I talked about, people where there's an age gap and they're labeled as sexual predator because they've had sex with their girlfriend who's 2 years younger than they are. Or people who can be rehabilitated.
And I'm not sure that's a possibility. I think that's
I think
that's fantasy island.
You want to spend the money or not?
Yeah, I do. As a matter of fact, and you know how I am when it comes to tax dollars. And I'm all for paying to keep these creeps, and they are creeps, locked up for a long, long time.
Enrolled in that more than $140,000 cost are the costs for treatment. It's the cost for incarceration. It's the cost for providing support to those who get released but are still being tracked. I look at the need to make sure that for those that have been deemed habitual offenders or the potential to be habitual offenders, as opposed to the ones that Denise, you talked about earlier, the teen that has sex with an underage teenage girl.
And I think we're not talking about
right.
that.
I
we're
think
talking
when you
about
pull those out
very
and then you
serious,
take a look,
violent offenders.
But they're all included in that category.
I'm willing, along with, I believe, the majority of the public, willing to spend that cost to make sure that they are properly monitored and that the support that they need to have in order to move themselves towards rehabilitation is provided
because
to
the
them.
Costs, if you let them out and they reoffend, the costs are even greater.
Well, then you got another whole population of victims that you have to provide support to, and that cost can be just as horrendous. Emotionally and financially.
You know, one thing real quickly that we know about sex offenders
don't make me interrupt you again for the third time. We have to move on. Let's get to our next topic. Yogi Berra once said it's deja vu all over again. But in the case of one Brett Lorenzo Favre, it's more like it's deja vu all over again, all over again. It was reported this week that the former Packer great twittered some teammates, informing them that this was it. He was retiring. Didn't take long before the denials in the story might have been fabricated. The Vikings have sweetened the pot, offering Favre an additional $7 million if he returns, making his salary this season $20 million. Favre still hasn't made up his mind. Now, Denise, sweetheart, I love you. I'm coming to you first. Do we have any idea what's going on here?
I'd rather have my 30 seconds to finish my thought on sex offenders because
I know you would.
I can't believe we're talking about this guy again.
It's only a 26-minute show.
I can't believe we're talking about this guy again. You know, like many people, I don't care anymore. I don't care. Either you play or you don't play. You know, don't make it the equivalent of another daytime soap opera or drama. I think people's patience, people's attention span on Brett Favre is running thin. And what we need to do is just say, do whatever you got to do. Let's
20 seconds for you and 20 seconds for you.
I thought last season was great for Brett Favre. I love to see him playing at the height of his powers, at his advanced age, and so I wouldn't begrudge him that. And if he wants to come back and do another one, why not too? I'm not so sick of him. I'm sick of the way the sports writers write about him. Who
they used to adore him. Now they hate him.
Now they hate him.
Yeah, 20 seconds.
You've got to put it all in context. Sports is entertainment. Brett Favre is the kind of person that knows how to hype the game, fill the seats, provide a lot of excitement for those who come to watch him play. And this is all a part, I think, of that preseason activity in professional sports that while we may want to admit that we don't like to hear about it, we actually do spend an awful lot of time conversing about it.
And it gets him out of training camp.
Denise. You know, two things happen whenever our colleague Rick Horowitz has to be out of town when we're shooting Interchange. First, he gets to the studio ahead of time, puts some of his thoughts on tape. And second, he spends extra time pounding away at his BlackBerry. Not an iPhone, you notice, and certainly not the new iPhone 4, which had one very embarrassing performance glitch when it hit the streets a few weeks ago. In fact, Rick thinks the glitch could be the start of a trend.
Dear Apple Motors, my wife and I have proudly owned Apple cars for years now, and we were excited to buy your new iDrive Sports Coupe. So many awesome features. Lately, though, we've noticed a small problem. Whenever we grip the lower left part of the steering wheel, our speed suddenly drops by 20 to 30 miles per hour. As you can imagine, this can be troublesome, especially in heavy traffic. Since everyone knows Apple cars are perfectly designed, we figure we must be doing something wrong. Can you set us straight? Worried in Waukesha. Dear Worried, you're absolutely right. Apple cars are perfectly designed, so you must be doing something wrong. Most people don't actually need to grip the lower left part of the steering wheel, so consider a different grip, or try wrapping that part of the wheel in duct tape. It's also possible that you're not losing speed at all, but that your speedometer is simply registering incorrect readings from time to time. No big deal, right? Dear Apple Stylings, whenever I wear cool Apple clothes, my friends are green with envy. Anyway, the last Apple hoodie I purchased, the iBling, had all those great Apple touches and then some. But a few things confused me. The left sleeve is at least 6 inches longer than the right one. Also, the zipper pull is missing, and there's a big hole where the pocket should be. Have you heard any complaints from other people, or is it all in my head? Perplexed in Pittsburgh. Dear Perplexed, It's all in your head. Those few things you mentioned help make every Apple garment a unique wearing experience. Try bending your left arm to take up some of the slack in the sleeves. A couple of well-positioned safety pins should get the Zipper app up and running in no time. Pockets are pointless. Dear Apple Flatware, we love setting our dinner table with Apple plates and saucers. Our only question is about your new iGrub silverware, and particularly the salad forks, which keep poking us in the upper lip every time we try to use them. It seems like the prong on the far right-hand side of the fork is bent way up compared to the other prongs. This can be really painful. Will Apple be offering any fixes? Bleeding in Boise. Dear Bleeding, no fixes are necessary. Just spear your food with your left side prongs and eat with the right-hand side of your mouth. Or switch to soup. Whatever. And don't be such a complainer.
Thank you, Rick. State Fair time. Okay, panel, if you could concoct your own food on a stick, what would it be? Denise Callaway.
All right. Lutefisk on a stick. Lutefisk is I know, it's a traditional Norwegian dish.
Yes,
my
we know
husband's
what it
family
is. Everyone
is,
in Wisconsin knows that.
That's what it is. I think that's the only way you're going to be able to get people to eat it is if you put it on a stick
Is it
and
gonna be
deep fry
chocolate
it.
covered?
No, deep fry it. Deep fried lutefisk on a stick.
Actually, I get very sick just yesterday at the fair with deep fried s'mores. But if I had to deep fry something, it'd be a peanut butter cup.
Ooh, I like that idea.
A hard-boiled egg shoved on a stick encased in Wisconsin pork, deep fat fried, and then dipped in a cheddar cheese sauce made from fine Wisconsin
The
cheddar.
arteries are hardening. No asabuco, huh? No. It's fried peanut butter and banana sandwich. Hey, thanks for watching. Dan Jones is back next week. Have a great weekend.